Ethan stood on the bridge of the starship Saber, looking out at the endless stretch of space. The stars seemed so far away, each one a tiny dot of light in the vast darkness. Yet in all the space between those stars, Ethan had been sent on a mission he never expected. It wasn't a normal peacekeeping mission or a diplomatic mission. This mission was different, and every soldier on this ship knew it. Ethan's team had been called to a small colony on the edge of the galaxy. The planet Zur was home to an alien species known as the Jorans. The Jorans were a tall, strong people with a rich culture. They had always lived in peace until a powerful empire from a distant star system attacked them. The Jorans fought back, but their enemies were too strong. The Jorans lost many of their best warriors, and their queen, Sira, lost many of her mates. For months, Ethan and his crew had trained for the mission, but the message they received from the Jorans was strange. It wasn't a simple call for help. It was a plea for aid, but also a warning. Every soldier who had come to help the Jorans in the past had disappeared. No one knew where they went or what happened to them. Some believed that the Jorans' enemies had captured them, but no one knew for sure. Despite the warning, Ethan felt something deep in his gut, a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, he could help. He wasn't a special soldier, wasn't a hero. He was just an ordinary man doing his job. But something about the Joran situation stirred something. In him, Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when the door to the bridge opened, and his commanding officer, Captain Jackson, walked in. The captain was a tall, serious man with short, dark hair. He didn't smile much, but Ethan respected him. Jackson was known for getting things done, no matter the cost. "Ethan, report to the briefing room," the captain said, his voice steady and calm. Ethan gave a quick nod. He followed the captain down the narrow hallway, the sound of their boots echoing in the quiet of the ship. As they walked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why did they need a human soldier on this mission? Why had the Jorans lost so many before them? When they reached the briefing room, the rest of the team was already there, gathered around a holographic display of the Joran colony. The planet was a beautiful world, with vast oceans and green forests. But the map showed something different, a series of red markers, indicating the Empire's strongholds scattered across the planet. The Jorans had been pushed back to the edges of the planet, and now they were asking for help. The room grew quiet as Captain Jackson took his place at the front, activated the display, and the image of Queen Sira appeared in the center of the room. She was taller than most humans, with shimmering skin that seemed to reflect the light of the stars. Her eyes were a deep, unsettling shade of purple, and her long hair fell down her back like a dark waterfall. There was strength in her eyes, also sadness and emptiness that could only come from deep loss. "Soldiers of the Saber, I am Queen Sira of the Joran people," her voice echoed through the room, both strong and calm. "You have come to aid us, but I must warn you, many have tried before you, and none have returned. Our enemies are powerful, and our people are weakened by years of war." She paused, her gaze shifting as if she were speaking to Ethan directly. "I have lost many mates in battle. They came to help us, but they are no longer with us. But I do not ask for your sympathy. I ask only that you fight beside us, if you are willing to risk your life for a people you do not know. I cannot promise your safety, but I can promise you that your sacrifice will not be in vain." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Ethan felt a strange weight in his chest as he stared at her image. He didn't know her, yet there was something about her that moved him. Perhaps it was the way she spoke, or the raw emotion in her eyes. She had lost so much already, and now she was asking for help again. Ethan knew that he had to make a choice whether to stay on this ship and carry out the mission, or to risk everything and go with the Zhorns. Captain Jackson stepped forward, breaking the silence. "You've heard Queen Sira's words? This mission is dangerous, but it's our job to help. We don't know what we're up against, but we have a duty. We'll be landing in a few hours. Prepare yourselves. I'll give you more details as we approach the planet." The team began to leave the room, but Ethan lingered behind. Couldn't shake the image of Queen Sira's face from his mind. She had lost so much, and yet she was still fighting, still hoping. and Ethan realized, with a sudden clarity, that he couldn't turn his back on her. He didn't know what would happen once they landed on Zur, but he had made up his mind. He would step forward as Ethan made his way back to his quarters. He felt a sense of resolve he hadn't felt before. He wasn't a hero, but maybe this time he could do something that mattered, could help them. He sat down on his bed and looked out the small window of his room. The stars shimmered beyond the glass, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he had a purpose. The journey to Zur was longer than Ethan had expected. The saber traveled through the vast emptiness of space, cutting through the darkness. With every passing hour, Ethan's thoughts grew heavier. The warning they had received kept playing. In his mind, he had always believed that fear was something soldiers had to push through. But now, with the unknown ahead, fear seemed unavoidable. Ethan spent most of the journey preparing his gear, running drills, and trying to keep his mind occupied. He spoke little to his team. The others were just as quiet, lost in their own thoughts. It was as if everyone felt the weight of the mission. As the ship finally entered the atmosphere of Zur, the planet's green landscapes came into view. The sight was breathtaking. Large forests stretched across the surface, and oceans of deep blue surrounded the land. But beneath that beauty, there was something dark, a deep struggle that had consumed the planet. The ship descended slowly, its engines humming as they broke through the clouds. The Joran city was visible below, with tall spires reaching into the sky. It wasn't a peaceful sight, though. The city was surrounded by the signs of war-ruined buildings, damaged walls, and scorch marks from past battles. The saber touched down on a small landing pad near the outskirts of the city. Ethan could hear the hum of the ship's engines powering down, followed by the soft sound of airlocks sealing. The rest of the team moved quickly, preparing to disembark. The atmosphere outside felt different, strangely heavy, as Ethan stepped off the ship and onto the ground. The first thing he noticed was the silence. There were no cheers, no welcoming calls. The air was thick with uncertainty. The Jorans were a proud people, but they were beaten down by years of war. Even their strongest warriors seemed to carry the weight of their losses in their eyes. Queen Sira's personal guard was waiting for them. They were tall and imposing, their dark eyes scanning each human as they stepped out of the ship. They wore armor made of a strange metallic material that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The guards did not speak, but merely nodded as they led the humans towards the Queen's palace. The palace was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was massive, built with smooth, flowing lines that seemed to rise out of the ground like natural formations. The walls were covered with carvings that told the story of the Joran people, stories of peace, love, and strength, but also of loss, hardship, and war. It was a reminder of how far the Jorans had fallen. Inside the palace, the atmosphere felt even heavier. The walls were adorned with more of the same carvings, but there was also something else. Large portraits of past leaders hung in the hallways, their eyes staring down at Ethan. With a mixture of pride and sorrow, Ethan and his team were led into a large chamber at the heart of the palace. The room was circular, with tall windows that showed the city outside. There, standing at the far end of the room, was Queen Sira. Her appearance struck Ethan immediately.
Ow.
She was as tall as the tallest Joran warriors, and her presence commanded attention. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes were as deep and purple as the night sky. But it was her face that held Ethan's gaze. There was strength there, yes, but also sadness, an unspoken weight that only those who had lost so much could understand. Sira stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Her eyes moved across the team, pausing for a moment on Ethan. He could see the pain in her gaze. But there was also something else, something that made him feel as though she was searching for something in him. She stopped a few steps in front of him, her eyes not leaving his. "Welcome, soldiers," she said, her voice low and smooth. "I do not expect your arrival to be easy. Many before you have tried and failed, but I have brought you here because I have lost everything I once held dear. My mates, my people, all of them are gone. But I will not give up. I will fight to the end." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure what to say. Her words hit him harder than he expected. She had lost so much, and yet she was still standing still. Fighting, it made him feel small in comparison. "I know what you must be thinking," Sarah continued, her voice filled with a quiet sorrow. "You think that you are here to save us. But I ask only that you fight beside us, as we fight for our survival. Do not think of this as a battle for victory. Think of it as a fight for what remains." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Ethan could see the weight of her pain in her eyes. But there was also something else, a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was there. Maybe she was looking for that hope in him. Maybe she was looking for someone who wouldn't give up on her people. "I will do everything I can," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We are here to help. We will fight with you, not just for you." Sarah's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of something like relief in her expression. It was fleeting, but it was enough. She nodded once and turned to the guards, signaling for them to begin the preparations. "We'll be shown to your quarters," she said, her voice now taking on a more commanding tone. "Rest. Tomorrow, we begin." As Ethan followed the guards out of the chamber, he couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility growing inside him. He had always been a soldier trained to fight and survive. But now, standing in the heart of a war that wasn't his own, he felt a deeper connection to the people around him. Queen Sira wasn't just a leader, she was a symbol of what it meant to survive in the face of overwhelming loss. And somehow Ethan knew that his fight had just become her fight too. The morning light crept through the large windows of Ethan's quarters, casting soft shadows on the stone walls. He woke to the sounds of quiet chatter and the distant hum of the Joran palace. Today was the day. Today the real fight would begin. Ethan's team had trained for this moment. Nothing could truly prepare them for what awaited. After a quick breakfast, Ethan met up with the others in the palace courtyard. The air was thick with tension, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Queen Sira had gathered them all in the courtyard, surrounded by her closest warriors. Her eyes met Ethan's as he approached, and she gave a small, steady nod. It was a silent acknowledgement that they were about to face the unknown together. "We fight today, not as humans or Jorans," she said, her voice low but strong. "We fight as those who are not ready to lose. Our enemies will come from the north. They are well armed and relentless, but we know our land better. This is our home, and we will defend it." The warriors around her were silent but resolute. Their faces were hard, worn by years of battle, but there was a fire in their eyes. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for them. They had been fighting for so long, yet they never gave up. Even after so many had fallen, they still stood strong. The team gathered their weapons and followed the Jorans toward the front lines. Ethan's heart raced as they moved through the dense forest. The terrain was rough, and the thick trees and tall grass made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. It felt strange, like walking into a story that was much bigger than him. They reached the edge of a clearing, and the first signs of the enemy appeared. Dark figures moved in the distance, their shapes outlined against the light of the morning. The soldiers from the enemy empire were tall, armored, and imposing. They marched in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming as they advanced. Ethan's stomach twisted. I had been in battles before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a mission. This was a fight for survival, a fight for everything. The Jorans had left. Queen Sira raised her hand, signaling for everyone to stop. She spoke softly to her warriors, giving them final instructions. Ethan could feel the weight of her words. He knew she was preparing them for the worst. The first wave of enemy soldiers charged forward. The ground shook with the force of their approach. Ethan's team was ready, weapons raised, their bodies tense and alert. He could hear the Jorans' battle cries as they rushed to meet the enemy. The clash was brutal. Weapons rang out as the two forces collided. Ethan dove into the fight, his heart pounding in his chest. He fought with everything he had, using his training to guide him, but he could tell that the Jorans were outmatched. The enemy soldiers were better equipped, faster, and more organized. For every Joran warrior who took down an enemy soldier, 2 more would fall. Ethan's hands were slick with sweat as he fought, his breath coming in short gasps. He could hear the sounds of battle around him, blasters firing, swords clashing, the cries of the fallen. His mind was focused on survival, but a part of him couldn't help but think of the Jorans. They had been fighting this war for so long. And yet it felt like they were losing more with each passing day, as he fought through the chaos. Ethan caught a glimpse of Queen Sira. She was at the heart of the battle, leading her warriors with a strength that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She moved with the grace of a skilled fighter, her sword flashing as she cut through the enemy lines. But Ethan could see the strain on her face. She was tired, worn down by years of conflict. Ethan's heart ached for her, for all of them. Had endured so much, and yet they still fought. He couldn't imagine what it must feel like to lose so many, to see so many fall, and still keep fighting. But that was the power of the Jorans. They didn't give up, even when everything seemed lost. The battle raged on for hours. The enemy kept coming, wave after wave, their numbers seemingly endless. The Jorans fought back with everything they had, but the weight of the battle was starting to take its toll. Ethan could see that they were running out of steam. Their movements were slower, their energy fading. The fight was beginning to feel hopeless. Then, just as the enemy was about to break through their defenses, Ethan saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A group of enemy soldiers had made it to Queen Sira. They surrounded her, their weapons raised, ready to strike. Ethan didn't think, he just acted. He rushed forward, pushing his way through the chaos. His heart was pounding in his chest as he neared the queen. He couldn't let her fall. Not after everything she had been through. He reached her just in time. With one quick motion, he slammed into one of the enemy soldiers, knocking him off balance. The soldier's weapon went flying, and Ethan grabbed it, using it to take down the other soldiers around Sarah. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The Jorans' lives depended on him, and there was no turning back. Together, they fought side by side, taking down the last of the enemy soldiers. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle slowly faded, Ethan stood beside Queen Sira. She was covered in dirt and blood, her sword still in hand, but there was a look of relief in her eyes. "We've won," she said, her voice steady but tired. But at what cost? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was clear in the faces of the warriors around them. The cost had been high. So many Jorans had fallen in the fight, and their hope for victory seemed more distant than ever. Yet despite the loss, there was still something in the air, a sense of determination, a belief that the fight wasn't over yet. As Ethan looked around, he realized something. This wasn't just a battle. This was a turning point. The Jorans had been fighting alone for so long, but now they had allies, people who were willing to fight beside them, no matter the cost. He looked at Queen Sira, her face still strong despite the battle's toll. She had lost so much, but she wasn't ready to give up. Neither was he. The day after the battle, the air was thick with silence. The sounds of war had died down, leaving behind only the quiet rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the Joran city. Ethan sat on a low stone wall just outside the palace, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The landscape was beautiful, yet it felt distant now, like something he couldn't quite reach, no matter how hard he tried. The battle had been fierce. The enemy had nearly broken through their defenses, but somehow they had held on. Yet even in victory, the cost had been painfully clear. Joran warriors lay wounded or dead, their bodies scattered across the battlefield. Ethan's team had helped carry the injured back to the palace, but there was little they could do to heal the deep wounds of the fallen. Ethan's mind drifted to the image of Queen Sira. She had fought valiantly by their side, but now she looked weary. Her once strong posture seemed to sag, and the sorrow in her eyes was impossible to ignore. It was as if the weight of the entire war was pressing down on her shoulders. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Taryn, one of the Joran warriors, approaching him. She was one of the few who had survived the battle without serious injury. Her face was hard, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, a deep sadness that mirrored the one Ethan had seen in Sira. "You fought well," Taryn said, her voice low but steady. "The Queen will remember your bravery." Ethan nodded, though he didn't feel brave. He just felt tired. The battle had taken so much from them all. What's next? He asked, looking out at the distant city. Are we preparing for another fight? Taryn hesitated before answering. There will be more battles, she said, but it's not just the fighting. It's everything. The Jorans have been fighting for so long, and the weight of it is crushing us. We have lost so many our best warriors, our friends, our families. We are running out of hope. Ethan couldn't argue with that. He had seen the desperation in the eyes of the Jorans. They had been fighting for years, and though they were strong, they were growing weaker with each passing day. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, they still fought on. Ethan had to admire that kind of strength. Wasn't sure if he had it in him. As Taryn walked away, Ethan felt a strange emptiness settle in his chest. He was part of this war now. But what if it was all for nothing? What if they were fighting a battle they could never win? The question lingered in his mind as he made his way back to the palace. Inside, the atmosphere was somber. The warriors who had returned from the battle sat in silence, tending to their wounds or comforting the injured. There was no celebration, no joy in their victory, only the painful reality of what they had lost. Queen Sira was in her private quarters, surrounded by a few of her closest advisors. Ethan had seen her there before, and he knew that she preferred to be alone after a battle, but today something felt different. There was an air of finality about it, as if the battle had changed everything. Ethan knocked lightly on the door before entering. Sira looked up from the table where she was sitting, her face drawn with exhaustion. Despite her strength, she looked small in that moment, like a woman who had carried the weight of an entire world for far too long. I didn't think I'd see you so soon, she said softly, her voice a mix of surprise and sadness. I wanted to check in, Ethan said, stepping further into the room. How are you holding up? Sira's eyes flickered with something that might have been a smile, but it quickly faded. I've lost so much, she said quietly. So many of my people, so many of my warriors, my mates. They were all I had left. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He had known about the loss she had suffered, but hearing her speak about it like this made it all the more real. You're not alone, he said, his voice steady. We're still here. We'll help you however we can. Sira looked up at him, her gaze intense. I know you're here to help, Ethan, but sometimes even help isn't enough. The enemy is relentless. No matter how many battles we win, they keep coming. Ethan swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. She was right. The enemy seemed to have no end. But there was something about Sira that wouldn't allow her to give up. She was still here, still fighting, despite everything. Maybe we don't have to win every battle, Ethan said slowly. Maybe it's enough to keep fighting. Sira's eyes softened, and she nodded. Maybe, she said. But every day, we lose more. And sometimes I wonder how much longer we can keep this up. Just then, the door to the room burst open, and one of the Joran warriors entered, his face pale. Your Highness, he said urgently, there's something you need to see. Sira stood immediately, her face hardening. What is it? The warrior hesitated. The enemy. They've sent a new weapon. It's bigger than anything we've faced before. It's already on its way here. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen the strength of the enemy before, but this was different. A new weapon. What could it be? Sira's expression hardened. Prepare the defenses, she ordered, her voice filled with authority. We fight again. We will never stop fighting. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was a fight for everything the Jorans had left. As he turned to leave, he glanced at Queen Sira. Her face was set, her shoulders straight as she prepared for the next battle. She had lost so much, but she was still standing. And in that moment, Ethan knew he couldn't back down either. Not now. They had come too far to turn back. The day after the urgent news of the new weapon, the entire Joran camp was on high alert. The enemy was coming, and they weren't taking any chances. The palace grounds buzzed with activity as warriors, both Joran and human, worked together. To strengthen their defenses, barricades were built, weapons were sharpened, and everyone prepared for what felt like a final, decisive battle. Ethan moved through the courtyard, helping where he could. His mind, however, was not on the preparations. It was on what Sira had said. The enemy had sent a new weapon. He couldn't help but wonder what this new threat could be. The last few days had shown them just how powerful the Empire was. But if they had a weapon that could break through the Shoran's defenses, things were about to get even worse. As he worked with the others, Ethan noticed the warriors were nervous, but they were also determined. There was a quiet strength among them, a shared understanding that they could not afford to lose now. But there was also fear, buried deep in their eyes. It was a kind of fear that only grew stronger when someone spoke of the past battles there. Losses, their endless struggles. The Empire had come for them before, and now they feared it would come again, this time with a force they couldn't overcome. Later that evening, Ethan was summoned to the war room, where Queen Sira and her advisors were gathered. The air was thick with tension. Sira's expression was as calm as always, but Ethan could see the strain in her posture. She had been through so much, and yet she was still leading her people. He admired her strength, but he also feared for her. No one could keep carrying the weight of an entire planet's survival forever. "Ethan, come in," Sira called, motioning for him to join them. He stepped forward and took his place among the group. The war room was filled with maps and glowing holographic displays of the battlefield. A large map of Zur hung on the wall, covered with red and blue markers. The red markers represented enemy positions, while the blue markers showed where the Jorans had made their stand. "We don't know what we're up against yet," Sira began, her voice steady. "But we have to be ready for anything. The new weapon they've sent could change everything. Can't afford to be caught off guard." Ethan nodded. "How do we prepare for something we don't understand?" "We don't have a choice but to fight," Sira replied, her voice firm. "We will hold the line at all costs." The discussion continued late into the night, with the advisors giving their input and strategies. As the meeting came to a close, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the threat of the enemy's new weapon that was bothering him. It was the feeling that they were being watched, as if someone knew their every move. That night, as he returned to his quarters, Ethan couldn't sleep. Awake, in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the coming battle, the weight of it all felt heavier than before. The stakes were higher now. It wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about surviving. If they failed, there might be nothing left to rebuild. Suddenly, a soft knock on his door broke the silence. "Ethan." It was Taryn's voice. "I need to speak with you." Ethan sat up quickly. "Come in." The door opened slowly and Taryn stepped inside. Her face was tense, her eyes alert, as if she were on edge. She closed the door behind her and locked. Something's wrong," she said, her voice low. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his heart starting to race. "I've been hearing rumors," Taryn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whispers among the warriors. One of them are saying that someone in the palace has been working with the enemy. There's a traitor among us." Ethan's mind raced. A traitor? After everything they had been through, someone from inside their ranks was helping the enemy. "Who?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. Tord shook her head. "I don't know. No one does. But the rumors are getting stronger. I've seen strange movements in the shadows, people acting out of place. I don't know if it's paranoia or if it's real, but we can't ignore it." Ethan stood up, his mind spinning. A traitor in their midst was the last thing they needed right now. The Jorans had already lost so much, and now the enemy might have an inside source feeding them information. The thought of it made his blood run cold. "Where do we start?" Ethan asked. Taryn looked around the room cautiously, then stepped closer. "We can't trust anyone, not even our own. We need to find out who is leaking information to the enemy, but we have to be careful. If we make the wrong move, we risk losing everything." Ethan nodded. He understood. The situation was delicate. If they accused the wrong person, it could tear the Jorans apart from the inside. But if they didn't act quickly, the enemy would have the advantage. "I'll help you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll find the traitor. We have to be smart about this. If anyone finds out what we're doing, we'll be out of time," Taryn finished, her voice grim. "I know. That's why we have to move quickly. Can't let them destroy us from within." Over the next few days, Ethan and Taryn kept a close eye on the warriors. They spoke to a few trusted individuals and kept their suspicions hidden. They knew that if the traitor realized they were being hunted, they would cover their tracks, making it nearly impossible to find them. The pressure weighed heavily on Ethan as he watched the Jorans prepare for the coming battle. The enemy's new weapon still loomed over them like a dark cloud, and now they had to worry about a traitor in their midst. Every move they made felt like it could be their last. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set and the light faded, from the sky, Ethan received a message. It was from one of the Joran guards stationed near the palace entrance. The message was short, but it made Ethan's heart skip a beat. "We've found him," the message read. "The traitor is in the south wing." Ethan's breath caught in his chest. The hunt was over. But now the real danger was only beginning. The air was thick with tension as Ethan made his way through the corridors of the Joran palace. The discovery of the traitor had shaken him to his core, but there was no time for doubt. The enemy's new weapon was on its way, and the Jorans had to be ready. They could not afford any more setbacks. The pressure was overwhelming, but Ethan knew they had no choice. They had to fight not just to survive, but to protect everything they had left. The palace was quiet now, quieter than it had been in weeks. Most of the warriors were preparing for the battle ahead, while others, exhausted from the last fight, took whatever rest they could. But everyone knew that this was not just any battle, it was the one that could decide their fate. If they lost, there would be no more chances. The enemy would sweep across the planet. The Jorans would be no more. Ethan found Queen Sira in her war room, surrounded by her closest advisors. She looked up as he entered, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. That was evident in her face. The weight of leadership had taken its toll on her, but there was no stopping now. They were all in this together. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "we have no time to waste. The enemy's weapon will be here soon. We must move quickly." Ethan nodded, though he didn't fully understand the scope of the threat. He had seen the power of the Empire's forces firsthand, but this new weapon, whatever it was something different. It was the unknown that gnawed at him. What if they were unprepared? What if the Joran's last stand ended in failure? "We've done everything we can," Sira continued, her gaze unwavering. "Now we fight. For our people, for our future." Her words were like a fire, burning away any doubts that had lingered in Ethan's mind. He had seen her strength, her determination. She had lost so much, yet she still stood tall, unwilling to let her people fall without a fight. In that moment, he knew that he couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. As the warriors prepared for battle, Ethan and Sira discussed their strategy. The new weapon would arrive in a matter of hours, and they had to make sure they were ready to meet it head-on. They couldn't afford to hold back. The Jorans would fight until the very end. Ethan found Taryn once the meeting ended. They quickly moved to the front lines. The Jorans' defenses were stronger than ever, but the enemy's new weapon was an unknown factor. They had to be prepared for anything. Tarn walked beside Ethan, her face set in a grim expression. "This is it," she said quietly. "Enemy will not stop. They've thrown everything at us before, and now they're bringing something worse." "I know," Ethan replied, "but we can't stop now. We've come too far to let fear win." Taryn glanced at him, her expression softening just for a moment. "You're right. We fight because we have no choice. And we fight because we still have something worth fighting for." The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. A messenger arrived, breathless and anxious. "The enemy's weapon is almost here," he said, his voice trembling. "They're moving quickly. We need to act now." Ethan's heart raced. This was it. The time for waiting was over. They had to make their stand. "We will fight," Sira's voice rang out from behind them. She had joined them, her presence commanding as always. "Everyone, to your stations. The enemy won't get through us." As they moved to the front lines, the Jorans and humans worked side by side. Ethan could see the fear in some of their faces, but there was something else, too, a quiet determination. They knew this fight could be their last, but they were ready to give everything they had. The ground shook as the enemy's weapon approached. The sky overhead darkened, and the sound of rumbling engines filled the air. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of the weapon's arrival. And then they saw it. A massive warship, larger than any Ethan had ever seen, descended from the sky. It was like a shadow, blocking out the sun as it hovered over the battlefield. The Jorans' defenses were ready, but this weapon was unlike anything they had faced before. The warship opened fire, its weapons lighting up the sky. The ground beneath Ethan's feet trembled as explosions rocked the area. The Jorans' defenses began to crumble under the sheer force of the attack. It was clear that this new weapon was unlike anything they had ever prepared for. Ethan's heart sank. They couldn't hold out forever against something this powerful. They had to find a way to fight back, and fast. "We need to hit it from the inside," Sarah shouted, her voice carrying over the chaos. "We can't beat it from the outside. We have to infiltrate the ship." Ethan didn't hesitate. He had trained for moments like this. He nodded to Taryn, and they began to move, weaving through the destruction and the smoke. Their goal was get to the enemy ship and find a way inside. The battle raged around them. But Ethan focused on one thing: getting to that ship. He knew they didn't have much time. The enemy was relentless, and if they didn't stop it now, they would lose everything. Finally, they reached the base of the ship. Ethan and Taryn, with a few other soldiers, used their weapons to cut through the reinforced doors. The ship's interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of burning metal. They moved quickly, taking out enemy soldiers along the way. There was no room for mistakes. They couldn't afford to lose any more ground. They made their way through the halls. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This was the moment that could decide everything. If they failed, there would be no more fighting. There would be no more hope. They reached the core of the ship, where the weapon was housed. The walls were lined with high-tech equipment, and Ethan could feel the hum of energy all around them. He exchanged a look with Sarah, who had followed them inside. Her eyes were determined, but there was something else too, something deeper. "This is it," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Let's finish this." With a final push, they took control of the weapon and disabled it. The ship trembled, its power fading. The enemy's weapon had been stopped. Outside, the battle raged on, but the tide had begun to turn. The enemy had lost their advantage, and the Jorans, with their allies, pushed forward. For the first time in a long time, there was hope. The enemy had been defeated, but the real fight was far from over.